Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Star Trek Discovery's second season premieres this week. In fact, if this video goes out on time, it premiered yesterday or the day before, depending on whether or not you're a Patreon patron. So it's Star Trek time once again. Since this season will not only introduce another new Spock, this time played by Ethan Peck, grandson of Gregory Peck, which just makes the fact that his grandfather starred in a movie with a bunch of future Star Trek actors even more hilarious, but it will also introduce us to new versions of both Captain Christopher Pike, played by Anson Mount, and Number 1, played by Rebecca Romijn. As such, it's time to revisit Christopher Pike's tenure as Captain of the Enterprise. I've wanted to review this book, The Children of Kings, for years, but the time never felt right until now, and there's no better time to talk about Pike. Now for some backstory about Pike's era. This book takes place in 2251, 3 years before The Cage and the flashback bits from the Menagerie, 4 years prior to Desperate Hours, which also featured Pike, and 5 years prior to the start of Star Trek Discovery. So this is about 3 months into Pike's first 5-year mission, so everyone is relatively new to each other and they're still finding their footing as a crew. Other than that, I'll reveal any other important information when it becomes relevant. The only other thing you might be wondering about is my outfit. Well, because this takes place during Pike's era, and I don't have a The Cage era costume, though I wish I did, I was just gonna go with my regular TOS outfit. But because Pike is in Discovery, I could also use this costume, and there are some mitigating factors regarding this book's specific timeline, so I figured we'd meet at a happy medium. Por qué no los dos? For now, let's just boldly go into Star Trek Children of Kings. The cover isn't bad, but it's not great either. I miss those old illustrated ones so much. This one is another photo cover with the TOS logo at the very top left and the title at the bottom. We get a blue space background with a semi-transparent image of the original USS Enterprise, no bloody A, B, C, D, etc., and images of both Captain Pike, the Jeffrey Hunter version, looking serious towards the reader, and behind and sorta next to him is Spock, and if I may pull out my pedantic Star Trek nerd credentials, I'm reasonably sure that that's an image from the original series proper and not from The Cage, based on the haircut. It's minor, but it's just something I noticed. I will say that this is miles ahead of Discovery's covers and a lot of their recent stuff, which is just images of a person, so at least this is transformative to the original images. Anyway, let's just get to the book. So, we're gonna do this a little bit differently than usual. I was having a lot of trouble figuring out how I wanted to approach this review, so I decided I'm gonna break the format. Instead of a general summary and overviews of the characters, the action, and then a final verdict, I'm gonna do a short summary and then go into deep dives into the main points that I want to focus on, since overall the book kinda sucks. But I do want to get my big problems out of the way first. But there are also good things I want to touch on later, and I want to end the video on a semi-happy note. So, without further ado, let's do this. The story centers around Captain Christopher Pike, very early into his 5-year mission. There was a recent attack on Starbase 18 by what are assumed to be Klingons with a cloaking device. At least that's what the chatter says, but I don't know. If they wanted to cloak, they would need like a giant ship covered in a bunch of dead bodies that can only be defeated by mushrooms. Wait a minute. Anyway, Dr. Boyce knew someone who had died, and it was a young Argelian woman he was very close to, having saved her life and adopted her after a research mission on Argelius years earlier. They recently had an away mission go bad while trying to investigate the starbase's wreckage, and one of the officers, Ben Tuval, is injured and needs to wear a bronchial shunt, a glowing box that they stick to his chest to replicate his lungs because of how damaged his are. Boyce is really mad at the Klingons, but there's no time for that because Starfleet has to pick up the pieces and hopefully avoid a war. After all, you can have too many Klingon wars in one 10-year period. Void Starfleet's warranty. While searching around for clues, they run into the Talith of the Orions, Leanne, who invites Pike and a few other crew members to her ship to discuss diplomatic stuff and get help with a medical emergency, as dictated in the Treaty of Gorengar, leaving Number 1 in charge of the Enterprise. During the visit, the mostly male away team succumb to the Orion pheromones and drop their guard. Soon, things go pear-shaped on the Orion vessel. Boyce had found a secret room with a rare medical device, the only one in the sector being at Starbase 18, meaning it wasn't the Klingons who killed Boyce's adopted daughter, it was the Orions. After discovering it, he's taken hostage with Spock's protege, Lieutenant Hodo, and most of the rest of the away team is killed, including Tuval. Things on the Enterprise also go sideways because the Orion ship, Karkin's Wing, is on the Klingon side of the border, and the Klingons don't like that the Enterprise's shuttle is there. Treaty be damned. When the Enterprise leaves, the Orions send a transmission saying that Pike and the away team were killed in a tragic accident by the Klingons, as Leanne takes the survivors for her own nefarious purposes, with Boyce as the golden goose. See, Leanne has discovered an ancient secret of the Orion race, an anti-aging potion which has kept her in power for over a century, but she's only got a little bit left and wants Boyce to mass-produce it for her. He had earlier found a young woman who appeared to be suffering from the same condition as Leanne, but Boyce soon pieces together the true reason. The girl he found was the test subject for their attempts at recreating the serum, trying to find a workable version. A new captain takes command of the Enterprise in the wake of Pike's death and sends Spock on a journey to figure out why Starfleet would immediately classify Pike's notes of the situation, putting them under one of the best encryptions that exists. Later on, Boyce discovers that the test subject is Leanne's daughter, and she volunteered willingly, because her mother needs the serum to not only live, but to keep her in power, since it also enhances the Orion pheromones, explaining why they succumb so quickly. Spock and Number 1 find out that Starbase 18 was dealing in some sort of biological warfare, just as the Enterprise locates a Klingon shuttlecraft, which houses Captain Kredos of the Hexar, who had been Starfleet's liaison for this sector until he was abruptly replaced, and Christopher Pike, no worse for wear. He had been found by Kredos floating in space, having been saved by a spare bronchial shunt that Tuval left on the shuttle. Kredos and Pike reveal what we already knew, that the Orions framed the Klingons for Starbase 18, and then reveal that it wasn't biological warfare that was under lock and key, it was a genetic database. The Federation and Klingons were trying to create a repository to share genetic data so they could pool resources for diseases and the like, but because the two powers are so reactionary, it was very hush-hush. They also reveal that Kredos' father has been taken prisoner by the Orions. Lieutenant Hodo plans to cause a cascade phase reaction in the power grid to blow up the Orion ship to allow Boyce and them to escape, while Boyce makes progress in replicating the serum, doing it more so to save Daleen, Leanne's daughter, who he takes a liking to since she reminds him of his daughter, than to help Leanne. Pike, Spock, and Kredos plan a rescue mission to outfit a shuttlecraft with a cloaking device, go onto the Karkin's Wing and find any survivors, and take back what's rightfully theirs. When they arrive, Hodo creates the reaction and kills Kredos when he and Boyce arrive to rescue her. When Pike confronts Leanne, Pike learns that Hodo is a spy from Starfleet Intelligence, probably Section 31, and her purpose there was to destroy the Orions and ensure that Starfleet takes the Klingon cloaking tech. So, basic cloak and dagger Section 31 crap. Pike, Spock, and Boyce try to save the Orion ship from blowing up, and thanks to Boyce remembering what Hodo told him, Spock is able to get power restored properly, and they blow up the shuttlecraft before Hodo and her handler can escape with it. They set up loose diplomatic ties within the Orions before returning back to the Enterprise to debrief and return to normal duty, with Boyce joining Pike in his quarters for a drink to talk as the novel ends. Okay, bad stuff first. The book plays fast and loose with canon. Again, pedantic Trek nerd, but for example, they refer to red shirts an awful lot in this book, but at the time that this book takes place, engineers were beige. And yeah, you can say that they were red in Discovery based on the Season 2 trailer, but this book was written close to a decade ago, so that wasn't a thing yet. And that's not the only instance of canonical problems. Ensign/yeoman cult, they go back and forth between the ranks, despite those being two separate ranks, is on the bridge, yet we were led to believe that she was relatively new to the ship during the cage, seeing as how Pike was uncomfortable with a female yeoman in one of the earliest scenes in the episode. And this is supposed to be pre the cage. They also mention getting information from the Ferengi, which apart from the fact that until Deep Space Nine, the Ferengi weren't too keen on helping Starfleet without profit, their official first contact, not counting their encounter with Archer's crew, is in the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation, back when they were supposed to be the major villains of that series. And there's a reason for the canon being screwy. I just saved it in this long because it's not something you would know until you finish reading the book. That is, unless you read the author's note before you start it. In the author's note, David Stern writes that he pictured this as a prequel to the 2009 Kelvin timeline film, despite that making absolutely no sense. For a third time, pedantic Star Trek nerd. But he deliberately takes inspiration from the Cage and original series novels for the characterizations, which doesn't fit with how Pike and Spock were different in the 2009 movie. Pike especially, because he didn't have that much of a character to begin with in the original series. Pike in this is disillusioned with all the war that Starfleet is in and says that he didn't join up to be military, he wants to explore. Except that in a timeline where Nero destroyed the USS Kelvin, Pike's past would be different. And while Pike was an unconventional captain in the 2009 film, he seemed to be relatively okay with the militarism and was ready to take the Enterprise into a fight. But that disillusionment gels better with how Pike was in the Cage, wishing to leave Starfleet after a bloody battle. And there's no evidence in any of the three films, or the one that had been released at the time, that Spock had served on two Enterprises. Because the Kelvin Enterprise's first mission was Nero right out of space dock. And that's not counting the Robert April Enterprise that was in the comics, but even the comics established that Spock wasn't on that ship. And God knows that Paramount would have much rather marketed this book with Greenwood and Quinto on the cover, because it came out in the wake of the film. If it's supposed to be a prequel, why wasn't it marketed as such? Well, there's a simple explanation for that. It's probably because it centers on Boyce, who never appears in the Kelvin timeline, and you can't market a character who's never appeared, so they tried to make it seem like it ties into the original series, because Trek nerds who love that era will buy the book, and I gotta hand it to them, it worked, because I do, and I did. Well, either that or they couldn't find a good image of the actor John Hoyt to use, and they felt that Spock was more recognizable. But if the canonical problems were all I had to talk about, I'd be happy because at least I could enjoy it as a sort of Elseworld story that exists in some parallel universe. A lot of Trek books are like that because of how many times they retcon stuff between TVs, movies, and other novels. But this story drags on for 400 very dry pages. I remember liking it when I first read it around 7 or 8 years ago, but I was having trouble keeping focused while rereading it for this review. It's why it's taken me this long to finally review it. Every time I started to reread it, I got really damn bored. Don't get me wrong, The Cage is probably the driest Star Trek episode ever, but it was never as bad as this. The mystery is interesting at first. The Klingons are the obvious first suspects, but I stopped giving a crap about the mystery the longer it went on. It's too convoluted. Everyone's a spy, there's 15 reversals, the Klingons are evil, the Orions are evil, Starfleet's evil, I'm evil! Are there any other evil factions I should know about? Meow. And by that point, I just really wanted the book to end, and the ending isn't even satisfying. It is very rough, with all the major revelations happening within the last 5 chapters, and we spend 390 pages getting there, and then it's just over in the blink of an eye. So much happens in such a short span of time that it makes me wonder why we had to wait that long for any sort of resolution. There were 400 goddamn pages to work with, and we spent 90% of them on build-up. It's not even satisfying when Pike destroys the shuttlecraft or when Hodo shoots Kratos, even though those should be core emotional moments of the book. The events are over like that. I also think that the Orions were pretty weak villains. The real villain was Starfleet Intelligence, and we don't even find that out until the last few chapters. By the time we're done reeling with the revelation, the book is over. There's no real consequences, since it just ends with nary a mention of the aftermath of Starfleet Intelligence trying to steal a cloaking device and killing Klingons. And I barely had any time to process it, let alone see Pike process it. But it's not all bad. The boy stuff is really good. It's good to get background on him since he was pretty much a blank slate even in the cage. He was barely a factor in that since he was mainly just a show of the concept and of Pike's character. The stuff with his daughter and his medical ethics is extremely interesting and endearing. It's just a shame that that's not told to us outright. I'd be interested in this story if I didn't pick it up because I saw Pike and Spock on the cover. Pike vanishes for a goddamn third of the book. Spock is pretty decently in character, though too logical. We're led to believe that the shift happened in between the cage and where no man has gone before, since he's pretty jovial in the cage. But Pike, despite my issues with his character, when he's around is a decent captain, and number 1 is decently written as well. Everyone acts approximately how they should, although there is something off about them, probably the canonical disjointedment I mentioned earlier. They might not be exactly right, but I did enjoy following Pike and Boyce's journeys. One thing I loved is that there is a really funny running gag in the last third of the book, where Pike, having just gotten back from the Klingon shuttle and covered in a week's worth of dirt, tries to take a bath instead of a sonic shower, but he keeps being interrupted and the water gets cold. Even if I was bored while reading it, I was able to push forward to keep reading because that was pretty hilarious. Also, the new characters are pretty interesting. The other crew, Tuvul, Pitcairn, it fleshes out an Enterprise that we only vaguely knew. Sort of like how in Discovery the Shenzhou was fleshed out in the books because of how little we see of it during the series proper. And getting a glimpse into Orion society is interesting, even if I think that Stern tried to give us too much into it and made the book a little bloated. And that was Star Trek The Children of Kings. So, what are my final thoughts? I liked the book a lot when I first read it, back when I was first getting into Star Trek, but I really dislike it now. How much of that is me becoming a pedantic nerd, and how much is just changing tastes, I don't know. As much as I wanted to like it, because it gives us more info on a lesser-known character, and the characters are well written, but they're not written like the characters they're supposed to be, and I just can't get past that. Between the fact that it can't decide whether or not it wants to be Prime or Kelvin, and the fact that there's so many reversals that it made my head spin, it's a convoluted mess that doesn't really know what it wants to be. And for a good chunk of it, it's super boring and dry. Maybe that makes it similar to the pilot that introduced Pike to us, but it doesn't work in a book without having good actors to make the dry dialogue workable. There's a reason that I like The Cage, and it sure as hell ain't the writing. It's Hunter, Nimoy, and Barrett. Without them, this book falls flat and fails to deliver a satisfying story set in either timeline. I cannot recommend this book unless you are a huge fan of Dr. Boyce or liked dry and meandering writing. If you're looking for an early Pike-era story, this isn't likely the Pike you're looking for, regardless of whether you want Hunter, Kenny, Greenwood, or Mount. Let's hope that Discovery can manage to get Pike and his Enterprise right, and next time, I think we're going to do a different type of voyage with a different type of captain. See you next time. Are there any other evil factions I should know about? Oh, yeah. I'll get them, yeah, I'll put like a Romulan over it.